This isn't just a picture of some early 20th century drag queens in freshly post-revolution Petrograd. This is actually one of the 2 pictures included in the almost 300-page-long 1921 legal case that includes 2 gay weddings, counter-revolutionary conspiracies, petty drama, and a young Communist Party member whose investigation led him back to himself. I got access to the documents and read all of them, naturally, and I'm here to give you some never-seen-before in-depth tea. Listen, no fancy drinks today, just alcohol-free beer. We're going through a heat wave. In this case, because of its obscurity, would have continued to gather dust on the shelves of the Central State St. Petersburg archive, if not for 2 historians interested in post-revolution queer culture. Dan Healey's Homosexual Desire in Revolutionary Russia doesn't only constitute a foundational text in the field of Slavic and Russian specifically queer studies, but also contains the first, as far as I could find anyway, mention of the case. Olga Хорошилова from the St. Petersburg State University of Industrial Technology and Design, then, is the one who identified and located the case file, and has written extensively and in-depth about it in numerous articles and her book on what she terms the Russian travesty. Хорошилова also identified pretty much everybody in the picture, which was uncaptioned in the original case file. Without the work of these 2 researchers, I would never have known about this part of my hometown's queer history. Yeah, I didn't know if this is gonna be a surprise to anybody, but I'm originally from St. Petersburg, Russia. I was born there, I spent the first 22 years of my life there. And through that, I was able to access the full digitized case files. St. Petersburg and Petrograd, by the way, are the same city, and so is Leningrad. The government was just having a blast changing the city's name 3 times in a single century. The historical and current name is St. Petersburg, because that's what the city was named when it was founded. But in 1921-22, when this was all taking place, it was still Petrograd, and I'm going to be using the period-appropriate name. Russian is my native language. Нихуя себе, да? And all the translations were done by yours truly. I also enlisted the help of a friend who has actual experience as a synchronized translator to ensure we captured the tone, the poeticism, and the interesting word choices of some of these testimonies. That's why some of them will also sound kind of weird, because I'm trying to preserve as much of the original verbiage and grammar as I can. That being said, some of the terms which were used in early 20th century Russia have changed in meaning to the point where it would harm the legibility of the video. Like the word pederasty, in this case, is used to refer to penetrative gay sex. But in the modern mind, it clearly denotes something different. I've chosen to replace such terms with more precise, when possible, contemporary equivalents to avoid confusion. Like when I say manual gratification, I trust that you lot understand what those words refer to. And, you know, I don't really censor my stuff. I've tried to keep as much as possible in, but there's only so much YouTube can take before they decide that I don't actually need to pay rent this month. So the uncensored and slightly extended cut is up on Patreon right now. And now that all that is out of the way, let me set the stage. I say this in every video that has to do with history, but you can just take something from over a century ago and read it through your modern day lens, trying to apply 21st century ideas to it. And that is especially true for topics the understanding and definition of which has evolved as drastically as queerness over the last century. People in various cultures used to not conceptualize queerness as an identity, for example, a part of your being, but instead an action, something you did. So we're gonna be broadly talking about Russia, but St. Petersburg specifically. In the late 19th and early 20th century, St. Petersburg was the capital city of the empire. It was also undergoing rapid transformation. The emancipation of the serfs in 1861, combined with industrialization, changed the makeup of the population of the city, as well as the family structures drastically. Men were coming to the city, often seasonally, and leaving their families behind in the village, and staying in crammed accommodations which prevented the replication of typical peasant marriage and family patterns. This generally resulted in newer and messier relations, be they hetero or homosexual. And though the empire's legal codex, first introduced in 1846 and active all the way up until 1918, included sodomy, the article carried the function of social control and was not often used to persecute queerness in men, and didn't include female homosexuality or gender transgressions. many such cases. Some of the things we would consider to be queer experiences were actually seen as simply an extension of male sexuality in the absence of women. They weren't seen as stemming from desire, but rather from necessity. You know, a hole is a hole. And those relationships were also sometimes, well, very questionable in terms of consent. Like, say your wife's away, but the carriage driver or the servants are right there. Same goes for workplaces, for instance, which gave birth to such quotes as, "I came not long ago to Petersburg from the village, and not knowing the customs here did not complain, because I thought that's the way things work with every master." The consensual encounters that were seen as queer, however, gave birth to the urban homosexual subculture that was closer to what we are used to today. In St. Petersburg, there were specific cruising spots, such as Passage and the Chinizeli Circus, flagging methods such as red cravats and handkerchiefs, and lingo, such as totki, literally aunties in Russian. In 1908, a certain Vladimir Ruadze released a scandalous pamphlet entitled "K sudu," roughly translated as "We condemn," which meticulously described and denounced what he termed the little homosexual world, ironically instead documenting and preserving it for future generations. The little homosexual world, surprisingly, kept up a somewhat conservative social divide even after the revolution. Basically, there were two subgroups within male queer community: the aristocrats and the peasants. You'll never guess which group was in charge of the naming. The aristocrats looked down on peasants and kept to themselves. They also had access to bigger and more private spaces, living spaces included, thus hosting more private events and being able to construct more elaborate settings behind closed doors for their identities and partnerships. The peasants, on the other hand, were often limited to entertainment-specific spaces such as cinema or the aforementioned cramped living situations. The owner of the apartment where this whole story takes place even pointed out, "The reason they asked for the party to be at my apartment is because it has a big living room." There wasn't a lot of intergroup mobility save for drag performers, or to use the terminology of the time, female impersonators. On top of all that, the ban on consensual sodomy was eliminated in the 1922 Russian Criminal Code, which led to the 11-year interval of sodomy decriminalization that would end during Stalin's rule. But in 1921-22, when the story takes place, the queer subject is still kind of in limbo, which might be an explanation for why the whole thing was so dragged out and why the police didn't know what to do. In 1920, a certain Navy guy by the name of Afanasy Firsovich Shaur decided to infiltrate a counter-revolutionary Petrograd group that he discovered after being invited to multiple parties by his friend Baron Schilling. Afanasy Firsovich is a fitting name because this diva was, in fact, fierce. What tipped him off about the parties in question is that those were private gatherings of exclusively men that would retreat to separate rooms in pairs or small groups and would sometimes call each other by female pseudonyms. Yeah, Shaur Firsovich Holmes infiltrated the gay circle of Petrograd. And not just infiltrated. This guy had the courage and dedication many modern-day investigators lack. He bravely attended all the functions, one of them a gay wedding. He also bravely rented an apartment of his own and bravely started organizing his own gay parties. For investigation purposes, of course. The first party took place on December 6, 1920. And on the same day, Shaur contacted the Petrograd police, demanding a raid on this organization that was surely damaging the revolutionary morale. He got no response. So a week later, he threw another party and contacted the police again. And again, silence. So on December 20th, Shaur marched his ass to the Criminal Investigation Department and wrote a 6-page long, borderline nonsensical account of his heretofore investigative work and promising that the next party was going to include all the members of this deeply sinister counter-revolutionary conspiracy. In it, Shaur also wrote about his unwavering dedication to the communist cause. He embedded himself in the organization so deeply that a certain Lev Savitsky was now in love with him. And Shaur, being the secret agent that he is, just had to return his love confession and organize a wedding so grand that no member of the organization could ignore it. Finally, the Petrograd police granted his request. On January 15th, 1921, in a freshly post-revolution Petrograd, sometime close to midnight at Semyonovskaya Street 6, apartment 1, a police squad busted into a party expecting to find counter-revolutionary conspirators. Actually, I'm not sure about the exact time, since the only direct reference to the time is one of the arrested saying, "I cannot tell you what time we got there, because I don't own a watch." But a lot of others mention that the whole thing went down after 11 p.m., but that's kind of tangential. What the police did find were 95 men, some donning female dress. Utterly confused and not sure whether there was a conspiracy going on, the police packed all 95 people in and delivered them to the precinct for intake testimony. These testimonies make up most of the 300-page-long case file, aptly named "The Case About a Society of Homosexuals." Since there are so many people involved, and I don't want you to get lost in the sea of messy Petrograd gays, I'm only going to keep the full first and last names of the main characters of this drama and those who can be seen in the photo. The rest will be abbreviated. Let me introduce the dramatist personae of this wedding really quick.
Lev Savitsky as the bride, Afanasy Shaur as the groom, Georgy Avalov as the mother, Alexander Michel as the father. He's also the owner of the apartment where this is all taking place.
The rest will be introduced in due time. The fun didn't start when the police were taking testimonies. It started when everyone arrived at the precinct, where, as per the protocol, two of the arrested were caressing each other's backs and arms and kissing. When asked about why they were doing what they were doing, the kissee said,
"He was kissing me on the cheek for some unknown reason. I think because he fancied me."
And the kisser said,
"I wasn't kissing this man. I just leaned in really close so that I could talk to him."
With that misunderstanding cleared up, the police started to slowly interrogate and process others arrested at the party. One of the things they asked everyone was, "So, how'd you end up at the party?"
I know some of the guests, not their first or last names though. I also know the party as a gathering of sodomites. There was nobody who just happened to end up there at this party. Everyone who turned up was aware of what kind of party this was. I just happened to end up there.
And I should reiterate, these are all real quotes from the case. Not only that, these two are back to back in the file. I didn't even have to write the jokes for this video, in all honesty. Let me tell you, these queens treated this like a multiple choice question. It seems nobody was there for the gay wedding, but for a variety of different reasons instead. Option A, research.
I went to the party out of curiosity. I showed up out of curiosity because I supposed I was going to come across something unnatural there. I go to such parties because of my strictly psychological interest in them.
Option B, culture.
I was at the party because I was told it was going to be a masquerade. I ended up at the party because my acquaintance Yevgeny Kiselov invited me to back his performance up with music at this, what was supposed to be a concert. I was told there were going to be a lot of artists there. Since I'm interested in art, I went to the party. I didn't see my friend or the conservative professor who it was rumored was going to attend. And the atmosphere led me to believe that maybe this was not an artsy party, but a gathering of perverts.
Option C, they were actually about to leave.
I went to the party to dance and watch some ballet, but all I found there were men dressed up as women. I was invited by Savitsky, whom I knew because we were army mates. I later found out he was a sodomite. Still, I accepted his invitation, but then I saw that the group gathered there was not fit for me, and I wanted to leave, but couldn't, since the police raided the party. I wasn't actually able to get to the party since I got arrested when climbing the stairs to the apartment.
And option D, perpetual confusion.
I'm the manager of this house. I didn't know a party was even happening. I ended up at this apartment by accident. I don't know anyone here. I was invited by my landlord. I don't know anyone here.
A lot of the people seemed to be genuine strays. Some were invited off the street, but some, more importantly, were invited by Shaur himself. He was really trying to hit those numbers, inviting his army friends, his navy friends, anyone he knew, basically. Generally, there seemed to be a lot of confusion about what was going on, even among the most aware, like...
It was a wedding party. Shaur was getting married, but to whom? I have no idea.
One of the people present was Grigory Vasilyev, often called Veltseva because of his spot-on impersonation of a famous romance singer Anastasia Veltseva. He also missed what the whole fuss is about, but for an entirely different reason.
I arrived around 9 p.m. Since my transformation took a while, I only entered the room where the guests were around 11 p.m. when the wedding was done.
There's this one diva, though, that was not beating around the bush.
I went to this party to kill some time, the same reason I'd go to any other party. I wasn't looking for connections in that community because I stopped practicing sodomy. Additionally, I state that I invited my friend to this party, saying that there was going to be a sodomite community of cross-dressers.
Another female impersonator, Ivan Grekov, who also worked as a bread baker in the Navy and was often called Fifi, was invited by a friend who expressed a similar sentiment. I was invited by Afanasiev, whom I met when I was on my way to a masquerade at a different place. I should point out that he was trying to convince me not to go to the other party. He was saying, let's go to Michelle's instead. There's going to be a lot of beautiful men there. And then there's the two women. Wait. Two women? Yeah, apparently there were two whole women at that party, and both showed up with their boyfriends.
When he came home from work, my boyfriend invited me to a party at Semyonovskaya Street. He said there was going to be vaudeville and dancing. He also said there were going to be ballerinas there. I don't know where he found out about the party from, but I think he said it was telegraphed to his place of work. I was shocked by the complete absence of women. Mr. A, by the way, was saying that women were gonna come later. He also explained to me that the ones wearing women's dresses were men, and that this was a masquerade. I have no idea why there weren't any women there. What the men were talking about is also not known to me. I wasn't eavesdropping, I only came there to dance.
The question that followed was, of course,
why are you gay?
Who says I'm gay?
The Russian Empire's anti-sodomy laws, as I mentioned in an earlier section, weren't really used the way similar legislation was in other countries. As Healey puts it, Russia did not produce its own Oscar Wilde. So even though the Soviet criminal code, which explicitly did not include consensual sodomy, was not yet in effect, the 95 persons arrested often talked quite explicitly and didn't spare the cops any detail.
I first developed a yearning for older men when I was a youngster. It typically manifested in the form of mutual gratification, but I was mostly interested in having conversations, so to speak, with like-minded individuals who were much older than me and much wiser. When I was a student at the gymnasium, I found out the architect Mr. Y was a sexual pervert, and I spent hours standing outside of his door wishing to meet and get to know him and share my impressions with him. I most enjoy self-gratification. I had a romance with a woman, but more so of the platonic kind, because despite all her attempts to sexually arouse me, nothing ever came of that. I partake in sodomy, but rarely so. I actually came to the party with Mr. H, whom I engaged in mutual gratification with.
I used to engage in self-gratification for about 5 years as a youth, and it influenced my health a lot. I started having these attacks and I had to quit school without finishing it. Then I stopped doing that. After some time, I started doing it again, but since my attacks resumed, I had to quit once and for all and haven't engaged in that ever since. I have an attraction to men that I don't express in any way. I have relations with women, and quite often, so much that I caught syphilis.
Nowadays, I don't engage in self-gratification or mutual gratification, possibly because of my lackluster nutrition.
I've stopped engaging in sodomy around half a year ago, since I have developed an apathy towards everything, and nowadays I'm only interested in wearing women's clothes. Fyodor Poluyanov, one of the more well-known and established female impersonators of Petrograd, also going by Fifi for his performances, didn't hold back at all. Ever since I was a child, I've had some quirks, such as nervous crying, hysterics, apathy, attraction to both men and women. As a child, I was treated, and my mother would take me to Bekhterev. I don't practice sodomy, nor did I used to, but I engage in manual gratification, both alone and with others. I've never been in a sexual relationship with a woman. I can't tell you why. Vladimir Mikhailovich Bekhterev, by the way, was not just a man with an incredible beard. He was also one of the leading neurologists/psychologists, it was all kind of a mush, of the late Empire and early Soviet Union. He was an authority on all things mental disorders. His research was also at the forefront of studying what was at the time called sexual anomalies. And he will come back later in our discussion of the case, so put a pin in that luscious, juicy, also sexy beard. Yevgeny Kiselov, an unenthusiastic civil servant by day and a fierce female impersonator frou-frou by night, gave one of my favorite answers.
I've engaged in manual gratification during my studies as a lawyer, and I did that both alone and with other people. I used to be attracted to men, but I attribute that to the fact that I was in an all-boys educational facility.
These men weren't really afraid of persecution, but instead of the stigma in the cases where their sexuality wasn't known to their social circles. So some of the testimonies go something like this.
I personally don't practice sodomy, but a lot of people at such parties do.
There's also one person who was particularly pressed about being outed, to the point where multiple people stated that he pestered them about whether they mentioned him in their testimonies, about what they've said, and would not accept "no, I didn't talk about you" for an answer. His name was Georgi Kholopanin, and he would attend and organize these types of parties, but he was also deep in the closet and even married to a woman.
I wanted to go to the party with my wife, but she had a toothache, so I went alone in her dress. I was appalled and wanted to leave, but couldn't do so in time.
But the police didn't really care about Holopanin's sexuality. Remember, they were trying to uncover a secret counter-revolutionary gay organization. So, Shaur's report mentions one particular member of the party, Mikhail Pavlovich Bychkov, as the head of this nefarious group, which he refers to as the Bychkov's boys. Bychkov was apparently referred to as Mamula, which is kind of like mommy, but with more emphasis on the nurturing nature one has and with less, like, porn undertones. When asked about the secret society, most attendees of the party basically said, "What? I'm just here to suck some dick."
I was aware that these parties have a sodomite tint to them, since some of the attendees are familiar sodomites to me. There would be flying posts at these parties, and I would receive notes with the following messages: "I fancy you," and "I would like to get to know you."
But others really got into the conspiracy spirit. Duke Georgy Avalov, who seemed to have been very Katya without her unit, highballed, said, for example,
"The organization of sexual deviants, I believe, exists under the name the Bychkov Society. At the top of said organization are Bychkov, Kholopanin, Baron Schilling, Polyanov, Milashevich, Petrov, and Girkin." Side note, all of them were arrested at the party. And some Bogdanov and Filosofov. What made me sure that the organization existed were the observations I was able to make at the 3 parties I was present at. The organization was definitely aiming at bringing young men into deviance, mainly military personnel, which can be illustrated by the following event. At the party at Suvorov's place, Gerkin asked me about the name of the man next to me, Armyman Bondarev, whom he pestered and invited over repeatedly. Bondarev declined every single time except for one, when he said he would come over if I, Avalov, was also invited.
As for the fact that most were army or navy men, well, that's because they also knew each other from their jobs. Like, Avalov just literally discovered the concept of a social milieu and thought, there's gotta be something up here. But there were also more logical explanations for why the same people were always at the scene of the crime.
I didn't know there was an organization of sexual perverts, but I've heard of something called the Bychkov Salon. When I would visit such parties, I always got the strong impression they were organized with the goal of both meeting new people and keeping in touch with the ones you've met before. Here's how I see the recruitment of new people. With a certain amount of audacity and bravery, which I personally do not possess, the members of the community approach new people, and thus the social circle expands. I do not believe there's a secret organization of sexual perverts, and when it comes to the sizable presence of perverts at Michel's party, I would explain that by the simple desire to meet like-minded people and exchange impressions.
So what's the truth? The truth is that there was some sort of Bychkov's salon, but it's the most underwhelming secret organization you can imagine. Basically, a bunch of men from the aristocrat group, with some of the peasants they fancied, would gather at Bychkov's place and listen to music, drink, dance, and talk. Those weren't even the rowdy parties like the one at Michel's apartment, or like the other parties. Remember how Shaur's tell-all mentioned the numerous parties he attended? To investigate, of course. Among them was an evening at Angliski Avenue 31, Georgy Suvorov's place. And by all accounts, it was a rather unremarkable gathering. Well, unremarkable to all guests save for one.
The policeman Yefimov invited me and a friend of mine to the party, promising us an interesting evening with the ladies. We were also invited to a similar party, also by Yefimov, and that one took place on the night from January 13th to January 14th at Angliski Avenue. When we arrived, we saw there were no women there, and so as we were about to leave without taking our coats off, Yefimov apologized and said there was a mix-up, that there was going to be a party at Semyonovskaya Street this Saturday, and that's where all the ladies were going to be.
But remember, the queer community was quite disjointed and classist, so not all parties were equal. And when this topic comes up, you really get to feel the animosity between the aristocrats and the peasants.
I've never been to Shaur's, Andreev's, or Suvorov's because I was not interested in the public that would gather there due to their low intellectuality. It was very intimate, and there were a lot of old-fashioned treats. Like under the old regime, the other guest said. I was also present at Holopanin's party, but it was like a family party that was vastly different from the parties described above in both the low number of attendees and their nature.
Bychkov, who claims that his salon was not much more than just a Monday standing appointment for music sessions at his place, even remarks,
Savitsky and Shaur also showed up. Shaur, by the way, was not invited at all.
But there's one party that was much more interesting. See, Shaur was to a certain Georgy Andreev what Ice Spice is to Cleopatra, allegedly. What ratatouille is to Ratatouille. He was jacking his style, but not jacking him off, basically. Because on December 18th, 1920, the original wedding took place at Officerskaya Street 10. Georgy Andreev, a 37-year-old chief of personnel at the Petrograd trade port, got married to Denis Nesterenko, a younger salesman who was often referred to as Dina, the femme version of his name, because of his feminine looks and the female roles he played in, like, theater pieces. And because queer people being messy and dramatic is nothing new, the backstory of this union kind of sounds like something you'd overhear at drag brunch.
I've known Nesterenko for 4 years because we served together in Kronstadt in the town hospital. When serving in the army, I developed a taste for sodomy and had relations with various fellow soldiers. I was sharing a room with Nesterenko, and through our conversations, we got together and we were in a relationship for over a year. When I moved to Petrograd, I continued living together with Nesterenko, and I also met Anisimov. I got into a relationship with Anisimov and moved to a different apartment. After living with me for a year, Anisimov moved away, and I decided to get back with Nesterenko. He said yes, and suggested that we host a wedding. My and Andreev's wedding was organized by me in order to humiliate him, because he dumped me and got together with Anisimov.
Denis, Dina Nesterenko, the queen that you are, which, speaking of queens, let me introduce you to some female impersonators of revolutionary Petrograd.
I belonged to the peasant group, but would often attend the aristocrat parties. I was against this distinction because we are all equal and have nothing to fight over. By the way, when the aristocrat group would notice an attractive peasant, they would try to persuade him to join their group instead.
When it comes to drag or cross-dressing, it was always present in Russian entertainment and culture, but was significantly propelled by, perhaps unexpectedly, many of the World War I soldiers' experiences in captivity. Many of the higher-ranking officers, I'm not sure that's the term, I don't care for military ranks, in prisoner of war camps with more relaxed conditions would put on theatrical performances where all roles would be acted by men. The drag queens, or the term used at the time, female impersonators, many of whom first discovered their passion for the craft in the camps, would go on to become popular entertainers among army men. Even in the camps, some managed to acquire local stardom and had fans fighting for their attention. This, again, was initially not directly tied to queerness in the contemporary mind, but was definitely more prevalent at queer gathering spots and at-home celebrations. After the war, many continued performing at cinemas or privately rented bars, or, like Fyodor Polyanov, Led Savitsky, and Evgeny Kiselov, be part of Army Kult-Prosvet teams. Kult-Prosvet, short for Культурно-просветительский отдел, basically refers to units within executive branches of the Soviet government. The Kult-Prosvet performers and artists would do cultural and educational work as part of early Soviet efforts to make art and what was seen as higher culture more accessible. Being a professional drag performer was not out of the realm of possibility in early 20th century Petrograd.
I am married and have a son. I'm a professional women impersonator. I replicate women's voices and dances. I know Grekov from his female impersonation performances at the Army Club.
Judging from the testimonies, female impersonators of the early 20th century wouldn't be too out of place at a modern-day drag show. They would dance and perform musical numbers and comedy bits. Like, Bychkov mentions that Polyanov asked him to bring some waltz records to the party for his number.
I went to the party to look at the man dressed up in women's clothes and to see the show they've prepared.
Others would dress up the same way you dress up at a costume party.
It was my first time at a party like that. After I familiarized myself with the attendees, it became clear to me what their objective was, as I saw that the people wearing women's dresses were actually men.
Costumes were either self-made or sourced from friends, neighbors, and even workplaces. Like Petrograd, the lead wig maker and hairstylist at the famous Mariinsky Theater, was predictably absolutely wig-mugging everyone in the pic. He even gave another one to his friends Felix Fellinger.
I was there because my friends said there were going to be ballet dancers from the state ballet company. When we got to the party, around 11 p.m., it was in full swing. We found some of the masquerade upon arrival. There was a bride, some costumes, and 2 subjects in white wigs. I invited one of them for a dance, but while dancing, had no idea this was a man. I only found out when the police showed up.
Abol got dressed at home and then came over to my place and brought wigs since he's the hairstylist at the Mariinsky Theater. When I got there, I did get a chance to dance. I was asked to a dance by some sailor.
Their dresses, as well as this Pierrot the Clown costume worn by Heinrich Heinz, were lent to the attendees.
I wore a woman's dress as a joke, and I got the dress from my acquaintance and neighbor Yegorova, who also provided the costume for Heinz.
Because the early 20s Petrograd was characterized by quite a dire situation for most, from food scarcity to the extreme weather and lack of accessible and cheap heating options, the quality of one's dress was not only a signal of what group, aristocrats or peasants, they belonged to, but a signal of their connections too. Alexander Liefert was one of the most respected stage and masquerade costume couturiers of the late Russian Empire, even working with theater troupes from abroad. His store was nationalized after the revolution, but he was still able to continue his work.
I dressed up in women's clothes randomly because my acquaintance Sailor Dubinsky borrowed some costumes from Liefert for the masquerade in the province he wanted to go to.
The naming conventions, however, were quite different from the ones that we're used to. You've noticed that it's a lot of 2-syllable pseudonyms, like Fifi or Frou-Frou. I can't find any information regarding why that was the fashion of the time, but apparently it was. In addition, the name would often be chosen for the performer by the audience, which isn't really the case today.
They call me a Parisian girl because I can dress really nice.
I dance at the movies where I perform in women's dress. My stage name is Fifi, but I cannot explain why that is.
Grekov calls me a French girl because of my knowledge of French. I also get called Boba because my first name is Boris.
I've been getting called Lulu for a while because my first name is Lev, so my girlfriends from Moscow gave me that name. I don't know why Vasilyev is called Veltseva, but now I think it's because he performs Veltseva's songs.
And at the wedding, the female impersonators were the main attraction.
Grekov invited me, saying there would be a lot of male performers there in female dress.
Not only did they have an entire lineup of performances that evening, they planned Shaur's wedding in its entirety. So I need to preface this by explaining that the wedding celebrated that evening was quite different from what you imagine when you hear gay wedding. Sure, it was a way to celebrate the couple, but the ceremony itself was much closer to a masquerade or a theater piece than a way to tie the knot.
The party was organized with entertainment in mind, and me and Savitsky developed the script for the wedding. Shaur was chosen as the groom because he has the figure for it and was strong enough to be the support during dancing.
I heard there was going to be an original type of evening staged like a wedding. When my friend and I arrived, we witnessed the following. Through the entrance to the living room, the bride and groom entered. The bride was portrayed by Savitsky and the groom by Shaur. Behind them, there were a lot of people dressed up in women's clothing. I don't know their names. I didn't witness their union get blessed, but many of those congratulating the couple were kissing. After that, the dancing began.
It was ritualistic in a way. Everybody had an assigned role, and they even reenacted all Russian wedding customs, like the mother blessing the union with bread and salt.
Dramatis personae of the evening were as follows. Me as the bride, Shaur as the groom, Avalov as the mother, and Michel as the father. Avalov and Michel blessed our union with bread and salt brought by Kisilov. I didn't know about the wedding in advance, but I took part in it. I was the mother. Michel was the father. I stayed in the small room for a while because it is the warmest room in the entire apartment.
Another notable difference is that the wedding was really not the focal point of the party. It happened in a secluded room, and most of the attendees came to dance, mingle, or check out the performances that were supposed to take place in the big room.
When we exited the small room hand in hand, the guests started congratulating us and calling us newlyweds. I can't recall which people were kissing me, but I can remember that Pulyanov was one of them. The party was organized with the sole purpose of amusing the guests and organizers. I was dressed up as the bride because I was going to portray the bride from the ballet Giselle. I was also going to perform 2 other numbers that I needed to get changed for, and I brought the costumes with myself. I chose Shaur as my groom because I've seen him dance, and we were a good fit for duets. I knew there was going to be a wedding because Savitsky told me, though from his words I more so gathered that there was going to be ballet or vaudeville. I kissed Savitsky and I told him congratulations, but I cannot myself recall what I was congratulating him on. Maybe this can be explained by the fact that I was drinking liquor.
I don't know whose wedding this was because I was getting dressed in my room from 8 to 11 and I wasn't even fully dressed when the police came.
The more people Petrograd police processed, the more they became suspicious of Afanasy Shaur, who was still claiming to have bravely infiltrated this organization for the sole purpose of taking it down and ensuring revolutionary morale stays high. But people kept saying they've seen Shaur at famous cruising spots, at other gay parties, at the bathhouses, some dating their sexual encounters with him as far back as 1915, pre-revolution. There's a common saying every post-Soviet person in my audience is probably going to be familiar with. Главное в ходе следственных действий не выйти на самих себя, which roughly translates to the most important part of any investigation is to not end up tracing everything back to yourself. And I think that perfectly describes the situation at hand. Even Shaur's bride, Lev Savitsky, thought the man was sketchy.
I was enrolled in a ballet school, but have practically never attended due to the lack of free time. I've been a dancer for approximately 11 years, and I've been performing women's dances for approximately as long. I mean, like, impersonating women, which is why I would dress up in women's clothes. I met Shaur under fairly weird circumstances. We didn't know each other, but he showed up at my apartment and started inviting me to his place so that I could perform a couple of my dance numbers at a party. I don't know how he knew I was a dancer. Shaur, for some reason, was always off to the side, like he was observing and eavesdropping on conversations.
So at some point, after about 2 days of intake testimonies and gathering information, the police finally get around to asking Shaur some questions. You know, Detective Fierce and Sergeant Devo were on this case. In his statement, Shaur basically repeated the whole infiltration story, but he also revealed that he's married to a woman, not to Savitsky. I'm gonna read you some excerpts from his testimony that I found particularly funny or revealing in terms of how much he was investigating.
Baron Schilling invited me to someone called Bычkov, saying that we're going to have the opportunity to dance, have fun, and there's going to be women there. We arrived around 9 p.m. and came across a strictly male gathering, except for one woman who was wearing men's attire. One of the guests was wearing tights and a short little skirt and was pretending to be walking a tightrope. Well, a rope that was stretched out on the floor. Everyone was dancing, but they'd often retreat into the next room in pairs, 3s, or 4s. They would talk about something, but suddenly get quiet if I walked in, which led me to believe the gathering was counter-revolutionary in some way. My guess is that the gatherings of these people were aimed at organizing a secret society of sorts, one which would gradually incorporate more and more people.
Olga Хорошилова puts forward the theory that Shaur's desire to discover and destroy conspiracy stemmed from a post-revolution frenzy of sorts. In her book on the travesty tradition in Russia, she posits that exposing counter-revolutionary conspiracies was not only a hot topic, but also a good way to advance one's party career and therefore secure some extra social capital, proximity to power, and privilege. Thus, even if this wasn't an explicit goal of Shaur's, it might have influenced his judgment and pushed him towards looking for a conspiracy where there simply wasn't one. Having heard that Shaur was at like every other gay party over the last 2 years, the police went, "Girl, what were you doing at the Devil's Sacrament?" and deemed Shaur a flight risk, demanding that he signs a recognizance saying that he would not leave town or change his place of residence. He, of course, ran off to Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. And the police, they didn't really know what to do with the case. On January 21st, they searched Michel's, Bychkov, and Polyanov's apartments and found absolutely nothing. Well, except for the 50 pounds of oats that Michel was hoarding for some reason. Yeah, they seized those. The search report actually says, seized for further inspection, 50 pounds of oats, guesstimated since no scale was available, and blank discharge papers from the Navy clinic. And what happened next was a rather rare, somewhat happy end. The case was in limbo for most of 1921, and in 1922, Vladimir Bekhterev was asked to give his professional input on the whole thing. Bekhterev came to the defense of the queer community, saying that what the men were doing was not a crime, but an illness. Yeah, he came to their defense, but remember, this was still early 20th century Russia. The ruling from 14th of November 1922 states, at the gatherings organized by this community, people were engaging in sexual perversion. The investigation found no underage individuals were present, and since manual gratification and sodomy are not actually codified in the criminal code, we should proceed with Article 176 in mind. According to Bechterev's analysis, we have to agree that these people are deranged and ill, and there's actually no corpus delicti in their actions. The one who almost got the short end of the stick is Michel, who, the police thought, organized a pervert den in his apartment. Thus, he is guilty in accordance with Article 171. Which is pimping, organizing brothels, and recruiting women to be sex workers. But ultimately, the entire case was dismissed on the basis of the lack of corpus delicti and the advice of experts. So many episodes of queer history end in tragedy. Death, imprisonment, social ostracization, etc. You know, growing up in Russia, I was watching my rights as a queer person be slowly stripped away year by year, and I know that a lot of my viewers from the more westernized countries are kind of in the same fucking situation now. So researching and then talking about cases like this one is very important to me. One of the things that I left out of this video is actually a tragic love story that I bawled my fucking eyes out about when reading through the case. Maybe I'll cover it at a later point, I don't know. I wanted to keep this, you know, somewhat hee-hee-ha-ha and just somewhat cheerful. So, happy Pride Month, whatever is left of it anyway, to all my queer siblings around the world. And if you want to see the full case file, just like email me, I'll send it to you. I mean, what's the Russian government gonna do? Fucking prosecute me for stealing a case file?